Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session, Enabling Change and Innovation in Higher Education. Now, no industry is immune from digital disruption. Organizations and firms that have been established for decades have seen their business models wiped out within a decade. On the flip side, digital technology has provided opportunities for newcomers that were unthinkable less than 20 years ago. So where does education fit into all of this? Who are the disruptors? What are the new business models? What technology should educational institutions use? What do consumers want? And will their expectations be met, and how? Now, these are some of the themes that we'll be discussing in the next 40 minutes. We've got a fantastic lineup to get this discussion going. We're covering all the bases. We've got innovators, we've got tech outfits, we've got the establishment, and newcomers. They may disagree with those terminology, and I'll let them to correct me on that if they wish to. In order, starting at the far end, we have Stephen Smith, President of Advising and Admissions at Hobsons. And Hobsons create digital solutions for students and their career management, and also for institutions to support admissions, enrollment, and student analytics. We've got Paul Feldman from Jisc in the UK. Jisc is the UK higher education, further education, and skill sectors not-for-profit organisation for digital services and solutions. I also know that they funded the Bombsight site, which is an excellent little educational interactive, which is where they've listed all the bombs that fell over a particular period during World War II with images and then content around it. It's an excellent piece of content that I recommend you all go and have a look at afterwards. We've got Anne Torres, who's Vice Dean of Internationalisation at the National University of Ireland, Galway. The university's website says that it's ranked among the top 2% of universities in the world. And who am I to question that? And finally, we have Tony Sheehan who's an Associate Dean for Digital Learning from London Business School. Now, I do know that London Business School is one of the leading schools in the world because I spent many years compiling and creating the methodology for the MBA Global Rankings for the Financial Times. I know that LBS is third this year.
Go back there.
Yeah, I know.
And we'll be first again.
Yeah. So I'd like this session to be rich in anecdotes and examples. There's some fantastic innovation taking place in the sector, and I think we'd all love to hear about it. I will kick off with my anecdote from my MBA ranking days about 18 years ago. We used to send out a questionnaire to business schools, and we asked from graduates who'd graduated 3 years previously. And we got these questionnaires, sent them all out. And the UK universities, we'd get a sort of response rate of about 20%. And that's because we sort of said it's very low compared to the other schools, and that's because the business school said, oh yeah, we don't bother keeping their addresses. We don't know where they are. So about 80% within 3 years, they'd lost contact with 80% of their alumni, which is pretty incredible. I'd say that figure is much closer to 100% now. Everyone's keeping in touch. So if you get harassed for money by your alma mater, I probably am partly at fault for that, so I apologise for that. Now, there's a football match going on, which I'm sure you all know about. I'm really glad you've chosen to be here. It's going to be an exciting session, and we will get it going straight away. I'm going to ask everyone to kind of give us, the panellists, a 2 minutes kind of opening statement. We'll then I'll post a couple of questions, but then I want to throw it out to you guys. During the Q&A, please wait for the mic to come to you. Please let us know who you are and your organisation. So, Stephen, do you want to kick off with an opening statement?
Absolutely. Good afternoon. And I wanted to start because as I think about this challenge, I think we're going to hear a lot about disruption, potentially of the academic program and what happens in the actual classroom. And what Hobsons is more focused on is actually what happens leading up to the point at which the student gets to the classroom. And we're very focused on helping students make smart choices at a macro level about what academic programs or what educational opportunities they're going to pursue. The anecdote I guess I would use, we've been involved I've been in the sector for about 20 years. And about 10 years ago, in a very complex, overly complex college application market in the US, we sought out to take the very paper-intensive, labor-intensive process that happened in high schools and to help move that into a much more modern era. And so at that point, while students were applying online to college, high schools sent all of the records that were associated with those applications on paper. And so in that first year, about 10 years ago, we helped to facilitate about 1,000 documents moving from high schools to universities. Last year, we helped to facilitate 30 million documents moving electronically from high school to post-secondary. And I think that enables a lot of really interesting opportunities. And I think it gets to key point number one that I wanted to make, which is that technology is really dramatically changing how students find and enroll in university. And it's doing that through things like workflow improvements, but it's also doing that by helping both sides to know more about one another. And you heard in the introduction talking about the rankings, and we think actually one thing that potentially evolves over time is that we can move away from a one-size-fits-all methodology of ranking students for everyone and help students to create a personalized ranking for themselves. Because what really matters is which institution is on the list of the top 5 for a particular student, not which institution is on the top 5 globally, because every student has different needs and different programs. Second key point that I would make as we think about this is that admissions and advising, those two areas of responsibility that I have at Hobsons, are really coming much more closely together as we think about making sure that students make good choices and institutions make good choices we want students to complete. The challenge there, just speaking from a US context, is that almost 40% of students who enroll in university don't come back in their second year. So we're doing something really tragically wrong at that point where students are making a decision to commit. And then the third is where technology is often thought of as maybe a barrier between strong personal relationships between faculty and students. We actually think that it can be the opposite. And that if we do this right, we can actually use technology to get greater insight into what's actually happening on a day-to-day basis, so we're not just relying on marks that might be at half-term or at the end of a term, and get really better insights to help guide students and direct interventions to students to help them stay on track to completion.
Right. So, I mean, our mission is to really sort of be the digital powerhouse of the higher and further education space in the UK. And our view is that particularly the higher education space is ripe for the digitization. If you look at industries like publishing, we were talking about like banking, technology has revolutionized them. And the way I do banking now compared to when I started working, 35 odd years ago, I mean, it's just chalk and cheese. Education has resisted that sort of disruption. And we think that there are, particularly in the UK, a lot of really great examples of best practice. But the general, the general practice hasn't really changed much since Sophocles, probably, God knows how many thousands of years ago. And we truly believe that the time for that transformation is now. We're actually kicking off a program across the UK in terms of really trying to understand best practice and promulgate it across the sector. But it's not just going to disrupt the teaching, and we'll talk a bit about that. And like Stephen, we truly believe that the instrumentation of the learning process is a key opportunity for change. So if you look at the Independent yesterday, you'll see talk about our learning analytics program that we launched, that we've already got 85 of the 160 universities in the UK signed up for, where we will be taking the digital footprints that every student leaves as they go through their journey, whether it's reading an ebook or attending lectures. And we can apply the analytics that Stephen's talking about to really understand whether they're on track. And we built a Fitbit type app for them so they can keep track of their own progress. And they can mark that progress against their peers in terms of, because we know that modern students have will have that sort of social need through social media to be able to sort of compare themselves to their peers. But what that gives us is not just them keeping track and the standard tutor type intervention. We truly believe that will reduce the level of dropout, really increase the success rate of students and of teachers. But also we're building a phenomenally rich database of actually what is happening in higher education on the ground, in second by second almost, because we'll be capturing all of this data, and the ability to truly understand how to transform higher education should emerge out of this work that we're doing. So we just think the time is now, and we do believe that 5 years' time, the UK hopefully will be a very different place in terms of, and a much better place in terms of education for university students.
Great, thank you, Paul. Anne.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm one of the academics here to speak about it, and personally, for me, the reason I use technology within the classroom is to facilitate engagement. So I have a very specific intent for using technology, and it's not to replace anything. It's really to supplement or to add value where possible. So let me give you one example. I teach a first-year marketing class to 450 students. Previously, let's say 20 years ago, perhaps the best that could be done is an end-of-term exam and maybe some kind of midterm assessment. Now I have 25 pieces of continuous assessment in addition to a final exam. So without some kind of technology to mediate, that wouldn't be possible. You know, you'd need 3 or 4 of me. I certainly would need a team of teaching assistants. So basically, for this particular class, half the marks go to the final exam, a quarter of the marks go to online assessments, which the students do online. They have a whole week, Monday through Friday, I should say, 5-day working week to do the assessments. And it allows them to test themselves. The materials that you might have with textbooks have really improved. And the technology is almost flawless. So, you know, if you have a small flaw in a large class like that, it's amplified. So perhaps now the biggest challenge is to get students to register properly for using this technology. And then the remaining 25% of the assessment is in-class assessments, and that's me working with them. Exercises that we do in class. We do have pop quizzes, and also the exercises are pop. I don't announce them, because I believe that being in the classroom and hearing me speak and ask questions. I do walk around with a microphone and I ask questions and I get them to talk to me, because I'm not just a little person at the bottom of the lecture hall. I'm actually a person willing to engage with you. And so by the end of the term, what I'm hearing is, at the beginning they don't like the number of assessments, but by the end they said, you know, it's great because I know I was super prepared for this exam. I know the material. I was able to go at my own pace. I was able to access additional resources that would help me if I didn't get something. And then also being in the classroom and having that connection and community is important, so that I can talk to them and speak with them. And they're much more likely to come and speak with me if there's a problem, an issue, if they've been in class. So one thing I was sharing with my colleagues here is that for first-year students, we know that getting them right at the beginning for engagement is critically important. If they fall behind, catching up is really hard. And then, you know, the kind of downward momentum to just let it go and leave it behind is hard. Whereas if you can create that virtuous cycle where they're engaged, they're involved, and okay, they may not become marketers, that's not the point. I just want them to engage with the material, engage with their colleagues, and to engage with me. What we found once I started taking over this module, the first year module, we had a revision. So we have our key personnel teaching first year classes. So you need to have your best teaching your foundation programs as well as teaching executive MBAs. So I teach everything from first year to exec ed and PhDs. And what we found is that the pass level moved from 40 to 50% on average to something like 90 to 97%. That's huge. And it also means because you have 25 different pieces of assessment, if they miss something, if they don't do well, it's not hugely tragic for their final module mark. And it allows them to kind of regroup and do better in the next one. Now, I would say, and I know Tony might mention this, is I'm probably much more pro-technology than a lot of my colleagues. And I recognize, you know, if as an academic you have demands to be excellent in research, excellent in administration, particularly more senior roles where you're making decisions and developing strategies, and excellent in teaching. And if you throw technology and learning of technology and how to integrate technology well I teach digital marketing, so maybe it's easier for me than it might have been for someone who was a sociologist or someone who is teaching anthropology. I had an inherent interest. And I would use any form of technology available to me, Twitter, Facebook. We've used all those in our classrooms. So as long as it worked and it helped engagement and helped achieve learning outcomes, I would use anything, really. So
I'm just going to hold you there,
Yeah.
Anne. 'Cause
Yeah.
I just want to move along because
Yeah.
I want to get it
Yeah.
out. So hold your thought. We'll come back to you very shortly. Tony, thank you, Anne.
Well, I'll try and build on that.
You
last
build on
point,
that for me,
if
please.
I may. I mean, I think the business school sector is quite challenging in that we have these rankings that randomly tell us where we are. But even if you're at the top of those rankings, when you look at the potential for disruption from tech, the only way is down. So for us, the challenge is how we embrace the good stuff, how we get over some of the scary stuff, and how we move ahead in the most appropriate way. And I guess for me, if I look at the digital technology, the digital learning sector of the last 10 years, it's actually been a bit disappointing when we look at the impact into the major institutions and the major universities and business schools. Because until the last few years, most of the focus has still been on the 3 letters learning, or LMS, learning management system. And if we look at the kinds of language that have come through from technology vendors, from adaptive learning through mobile learning to predictive analytics, this is incredibly confusing, and many institutions are completely frozen in terms of which way to turn, and often inhibited by quite strong processes and concerns about getting it right. So I think cutting through that is a real challenge for our sector of the next few years. And certainly from our perspective, the only way to do that is to be a little bit anarchic and mobilize the good faculty that really get digital and the students that frequently know more about digital than many of the staff. So embracing the community, being brave in terms of the processes and practices that one runs within the IT department, being a lot more agile than waterfall in methods, for instance, and actually accepting that there's no best practice, that there's no right answer. I think it is a field that's moving so quickly at the moment that we all just need to enjoy the ride and take some common sense decisions along the way.
If we cast ourselves forward in 10 years, how do you see, what kind of analytics, what metrics, what will we be measuring, or what do you think we can measure and the institutions will be doing in terms of personalizing education?
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous upside here. I think that there's been a lot of conversation over the last several years about predictive analytics, and of course that's important. Predicting outcomes is helpful, at least in understanding where we might want to redirect resources so that we could alter those outcomes. But it's really the altering of outcomes that's much more impactful than just being able to predict which students might need help. And I think, when we look at what we're trying to accomplish, it's really now about helping institutions to do a better job allocating resources to interventions that work. So if you discover, for example, that tutoring is an intervention that works with first-generation students, and you apply that in the first semester when you get the first evidence that they're having a problem, then we should double down on that intervention as opposed to something else. And I think the challenge sometimes is that there's lots of things that we might do for students that sound intuitively like good things to do, but we don't necessarily follow through and measure the effectiveness of each of those things. And that measurement, I think, is that next challenge in helping us to really make sure that we're placing our bets and making our investments in the areas that are likely to have the greatest impact for students.
Any other panelists want to pick up on personalization at all before I throw it out to the audience?
So I'm very intrigued by how far we could push personalization in a few years. I mean, I think if we start combining fairly well-established technologies like e-portfolios, new modes of assessment, personal choice, individual assets built up into a corpus of demonstrated competence from an individual. I mean, that is really a very exciting area to probe and explore. And I for one, look forward to working out how on earth we apply a degree or something to that. But I think it's a fascinating area to watch. Great.
Thank you. So we've got about 14 minutes, so I'm going to throw it open to the audience. Anyone want to open up we've got a question there. Okay, there's one here in the middle. If you just wait for the microphone to get you. And if you could let us know who you are and your organisation.
Hi, my name's Richard Jones. I'm from a firm called Tower House. I just want to ask you about the quality of digital content and what you think the role of open educational resources versus new startup digital content versus the performance of the traditional publishers in creating digital materials so far.
Okay.
I'll take that to start with. I mean, we're very sceptical about the quality of the open education resources that are around. They're certainly there and they're certainly valuable. But we're not seeing that real game-changing quality that we think is really going to move the bar in higher education and even more so in further education. We are seeing in further education, not so much in higher education, some quite interesting startups coming out with some who are really prepared to invest, and a lot of it's coming in on the back of the UK government's apprenticeship agenda because they can see the opportunity to monetize it. But they're really prepared to invest in some really quite interesting new pedagogical means using modern technology to really get in and change the game in that sense. So we're really excited by some of the things we're starting to see in further education. We're not seeing it in higher education, and we can understand the barriers there because a lecturer's own position and their reputation is a lot of what people come to hear, and I think it's going to be interesting whether that sort of resource is really ever going to sort of have a great place to play in higher education. Though it would be interesting to see, could Stephen Hawking monetize his views on black holes as much as I understand this, and could we sort of integrate that in to every course in the UK and that type of thing. So I'm sure there's the opportunity, but the barriers in higher are much bigger than further education.
Do you have an interest in this? Do you work for an organisation that provides or creates content for educational institutions?
No, I'm an investor in the space, so I'm trying to get the views of the panel about what the potential scope for open educational resources to replace effectively paid for content is.
I mean, I'd argue that everyone is a publisher now, and especially being on the media side of things, that I know that a lot of material that we produce, particularly our explainers that we do now, particularly in video and in interactive and animation, a lot of that it gets picked up by the education sector, and we actually get letters and emails from organisations saying that they're using this as a resource within, and at every level as well.
Yeah.
All the way up to higher education as well. So I think it is certainly the case that everyone is a publisher now, and that if the material's there and you can incorporate it.
So I'd be very interested in Anne and Tony's views then about the scope for open educational resources versus paid content.
I think it connects to the evolution of the classroom over the next few years. So if we as a business school are continuing to teach strategy models when everyone's together in a few years' time, I'd be very surprised. And that therefore puts a real pressure on production of good quality, high quality, engaging content before people turn up. So that certainly pushes you towards a degree of creation of content yourself as an institution, but actually we've got no desire to be a content factory if there are wonderful open educational resources out there, or indeed lovely explainer videos available somewhere else that have received wonderful investments and look good. So it's about creating a path through that. And I think that's actually the trickiest piece, in that for any given course, a piece of content, if it's really relevant, it doesn't have to be fantastic. It just needs to be on point and timely. But there's definitely a significant role there before people come to class, where in the future there'll be much more exploration of context, I think, moving forward.
Okay. Thank you. Got a question over there, and there's one on the right afterwards. I'll take you afterwards. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Nick Kine from Holtzbrink. I work for one of the biggest publishers in the world, and I'm not going to be drawn into where we are now. Paul, I'd be really interested to hear your views on balancing the public and the private in data. In other words, Stephen has an awful lot of private data around students, around admissions, about their progress through educational institutions. You seem to be trying to gather data through an app because you can't get access to that data the other way. How do you see the way forward of sort of balancing the public and the private in gathering student data and the public good benefiting from it?
So I obviously explained that badly. So we're capturing all of the data from the institution's own systems, from their VLEs, their admission systems, their library systems. We've worked really carefully with the NUS, for example, to develop a code of ethics for the management of that data. So we're really confident about holding that data, in this case, in the cloud. And we've got we've got the buy-in of the institutions that sign up to giving us that data. In terms of the use of that data within the institution, well, it's their data, absolutely free to use it. We're not going to provide, we certainly will provide a level of benchmarking because we think that will help the sector. There may be some, we will certainly provide it for researchers because to actually sort of, we need to anonymize it in some way, obviously, but to actually sort of educational researchers, that this resource is going to be phenomenal and unique in the world, and we'll provide access to that. I think if we can help the UK overall educational attainment, we'll certainly make it available with the right protections. We've only just seen UCAS being forced to make their data available. We're not hiding our data. We're not trying to keep it secret, but we do have to respect the fact that there is an awful lot of individual personal data. So we need to respect the privacy of the individuals rather than the privacy of the data per se. I mean, certainly, sorry, my understanding the key difference between what we're doing in the UK and the US is we're doing it on a sector basis funded by government. So we're able to do things on a sector basis. In the US, it's much more, my understanding, it's much more sector by institution by institution to help them their individual success. We're looking at student success, institution success, and whole sector success.
Have you had any problems in getting private companies to share the data they gather with you?
I think that there's a flaw in that. No, I understand and understand the question and understand its relevance in the US experience. Here in the UK, we're not experiencing the companies saying this is our data. It's the institution's data, and that's where I think we can do things that aren't necessarily available elsewhere. So Exeter University is one of our first pilots. All the data out of all the systems they use is their data. We're sucking that in, anonymizing it where necessary, putting it in our database, and they are the prime user of that. I think what we're able to do because of the sheer reach that we're looking at is that all the providers know that to play in the UK, they have to fit in with our standards and framework that we've developed. And we started off with a small number, and increasingly people come and saying, I want to play a bit. And open is a key part of that.
And if I could just add, I think I would say we subscribe to the same philosophy that Paul's just articulated. So we have about 13,000 institutions that we work with in 100 countries. Here in the UK, we have about 50 or 60 institutions of higher education that we work with. And in every case, the data that we maintain on behalf of those institutions belongs to those institutions and to their students. And so the rights and responsibilities associated with those data, we're acting on effectively as an agent on behalf of those institutions. If those institutions are either obligated to share their data with a governmental agency or they choose to, that's something that we obviously support and enable. So, but I think that the commitment to privacy is equally important in the private sector as in the public sector.
Great, thanks, Stephen. I'm conscious of time. There's a hand there, the lady there. I've got about 4 minutes, so I'll try to squeeze another question.
Hi, my name is Janine Lanowet. My company is Screen Takes Digital Publishing. My question is about differing learning styles. Learning researchers have identified 4 categories: visual learners, audio, reading, writing, and kinesthetic. I'm curious if you see movement in higher education towards adapting to the differing learning styles.
Yeah, very briefly, I mean, most of us are aware that students learn differently at a different pace. They need more testing or more support, where some people just get it right away. So I suppose you're using technology to touch as many bases as you can. And certainly you can get a sense of that in a smaller class. If someone needs help, you can identify that. In a much larger class, 400 or 500 students, that's impossible. So you're trying to integrate technology that allows different learners to access the style that suits them best. So at the end of the day, you're trying to balance effectiveness and efficiency. We're not always going to get it right, but certainly for the most of the students, we're going to help them out. There's always going to be some, for whatever reason, that require special attention or a different kind of assistance, and we'll work towards that, yeah.
You talked also about the difference in terms of resource intensity for the offline, online, and within online, the various approaches.
Yeah, my personal preference would be a combination of offline and online in front of the class. Teaching fully online requires a whole level of skill set that's different and far more time consuming, at least to my mind, not only to managing the technology to make sure that you can troubleshoot, but also just to engage the students. Whereas if they're in front of you, you can sense very quickly, if an audience is dying or they've got it or they haven't. And so similar to what they're doing here, my colleagues are doing here, you're taking those things that are a little bit more traditional or rote or basic, and you can use content, so basic concepts. And then you can come back into the classroom and do things that are much more exciting and say, okay, you've got that, and let's try an example. And so you try to engage them in something that's a little bit more live and active than just a chalk and talk dynamic, although there's nothing wrong with that as well.
Thanks, Anne. Right, the gentleman at the back there, we've got 1.5 minutes, so if we can be really quick, that'd be great. Thanks.
Hi, thank you. I'm David Gauntlet, University of Westminster, so I'm one of those conservative old academics from the conservative old institutions that
fine.
Paul rightly identified. I don't want this to seem too hostile, but that sounds bad now, doesn't it? But on a panel called Enabling Change and Innovation in Higher Education, I can see that most of you are talking about sort of practical, good new things that we can do to sort of keep higher education ticking over in the way that it ticks over. But what would you say to the suggestion that we don't really seem to be dreaming the dream anymore? Have we given up on that? There's not much transformation in the kinds of things I've heard about student grades and admissions processes, all of that. It's not very transformational, is it? I'm afraid. Sorry.
Very quickly, Paul.
So very quickly, I agree. We're just kicking off a program on technology-enabled label learning that is really trying to dream that dream, see where we can take it, and really sort of try and grab some of that future thinking type stuff and make it happen. So we intend to be there.
Andrew, do you want to?
Tony, do you want to comment?
Tony, sorry.
Well, I'd go back to this concept of a personalised MBA in the future, and if I can pull that off, I'll be delighted. But I think there are some challenges that lie ahead. We've got to be very curious about the future, and to take the institutions with us, we really do need to experiment and connect to the wonderful students that have got all the best ideas.
Well, thank you for your questions. We've run out of time. Thanks to the panellists.
Thank you.
Please give our panellists a round of applause, and thank you.